good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be in the world. It's Friday, and it is, February 6th, and it's time for another fun Free Hands Friday session. Welcome.
Yay!
So, yay! We've got lots of awesome people on the call with us today, and we are especially stoked to have Greg Howard in-house to kind of lead the discussion on the various different types of tunings for the Chapman Stick. Oh, and Kevin's here, good. So we got Steve, Damon, Rob's here, is running the show, and me, and now we got Kevin, good. So we have discussions. A question that I see a lot out on the Stickist is, what tuning should I use? Or I'm thinking about trying a new tuning, or is there literature for a specific tuning, and why is it tuned the way that it's tuned? What's the best tuning? These questions come up a lot. So we're going to hit on them all. And so without any further ado, Greg, I'll kind of let you lead us in with maybe a little history about the tunings, or just kind of set us up here.
Excellent. Thank you, Gene, and thanks everybody for joining in. The Stick's tuning is to be within the parameters of the physics of the string. Like, you can make it as high as you want it to go until the string breaks, and you can make it as low as you want it to go until you run out of speaker cone, basically. But within those limits, there's a lot of choices that we can make, and there are some established traditions, if you will, of tunings, mostly based on Emmett's original tuning concept. But there are some other kind of more recent new ideas that have come along as well. We're going to talk about as many of those as we can fit in during the time here. So first off, I'd just like to describe for you the basic tuning, what was called the standard tuning for a long time, and what's now called the classic tuning, because Emmett doesn't want anybody to think that there is one standard tuning. He wants everybody to realize that you want to use is wider. So the classic tuning of the stick is very similar to a guitar tuning on the melody strings. And this is a grand stick I've got here, but for now I'm just going to talk about these 5 strings as if it were a 10-string stick. So in the classic tuning, this string is a D, and that's a whole step below the E on a guitar. If you were playing a guitar and you plucked that first string, you would get this note. So the D here is this note, and then it goes down in fourths from there. So it goes D, A, E, B, F sharp. Then if you keep going on the grand stick tuning, then you get to C sharp as well. And then, so it's all fourths, unlike a guitar tuning, which has that weird half-step interval, third interval between the two strings. The Stick's tuning is all fourths, which means that any shape you play is going to give you the same kind of result, just starting with a different note. So a major chord is a major chord is a major chord. You play that shape wherever you want to play it, and you're going to get a major chord on those strings. You don't have to change anything. Now the bass strings on the stick, yes, Gene?
Yeah, so something I wanted to, and I think we talked about it briefly last week, but just to kind of remind, for clarity, the right-hand melody side of the Chapman Stick in the 12-string tuning goes to a D below a guitar.
D, C sharp. So it goes from the D, which is just below the guitar's E string, down to a C sharp, which is below the guitar's low E string.
Got it. Okay, so
just for reference, if you, for example, play the highest note on this tuning, you go up. We have 25 playable frets on this instrument. We have what we call the X fret, and then we have an octave here, and then another octave here. That note is also a D. And it would be, if you had a 22-fret guitar, that would be the note that you would be playing. Right?
Okay. Just a little bit of clarity there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always eager to have clarity. So thanks so much for stopping me like that. That's great. So on the bass side of the stick, the tuning starts with, in the classic tuning, it starts with a low C. So that's this note here. And that is the C below the E on a bass guitar. So the bass low E is right here, and the C is here. If I pluck the open string, I get the low B that you would have like on a 5-string bass. And these strings go up in fifths from the middle of the board. So it goes C, G, D, A, E. And then I've got a high fourth up on the top here. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But fifths and fourths are two different tunings. So you might think, well, that's kind of crazy to have two different tunings on an instrument like that. And what's the possible reason for it? Well, it actually came about as a result of the way Emmett developed his guitar. So he had a 9-string guitar at one point. It was a longer scale guitar, and he had taken some of those strings on the low end, and he had actually switched them around. So if you imagine not switching the strings themselves, but switching the octaves of the pitches. So when you get down to the bottom of a guitar tuning, and you've got the low A, and then the low D, the A, and the E, the bottom 3 strings of a guitar, you take those and you switch them so that the D is now an octave lower than it was, the A is the same as it was, and the E is now an octave higher than it was. You can play all the same shapes you were playing. It's just that you've extended the range of the instrument by a whole step because the D is now the lowest pitched note there. So he already had a guitar where he had fifths going out from the middle on this low end. And so when he discovered his two-handed tapping method in August of 1969, he already had 2 separate groups of strings with different tunings that he could start working with. And I'm certain that if he hadn't done that before he started tapping, that we would be tapping on a completely different kind of tuning today as a result, because the fifths aspect of the left hand led to some really amazing things as far as chords were concerned that we can really take advantage of today. And I'll show you a little bit about those chord shapes in a minute, but I just wanted you to get that context of how did that tuning come to be. And it came to be because Emmett already had his guitar tuned with inverted fifths on one side. And if you look in the interviews section on stick.com, there's an interview with Emmett about how that tuning came to be, along with some diagrams that show how it developed from a regular guitar tuning. It's a pretty interesting little article. So again, that's in interviews on stick.com, interview with Emmett about how the classic tuning was born. So up until around the, I guess the mid-'80s or so, that was the tuning. Like every instrument that Emmett made, unless somebody wrote to him and said, I want my instrument set up in a different tuning, that was the tuning that they got, was the classic tuning. And also in the original sticks that the tuning was developed on, so you take a look at this instrument right here, and you'll see that there's an inlay right here. You can count. There's 1, 2, 3. It's at the 3rd playable fret on the instrument. But if you look at the older sticks, they have only 2 playable frets. So the inlay is at the 2nd playable fret here. Okay, and on those instruments, we tune these notes, the open strings, to the notes that I was telling you before. So 34-inch scale, older model sticks. The tuning is all referenced by the nut. And on the 36-inch scale, more recent sticks, and also on the rail board, then the tuning is referenced by the first tappable fret, what we call the X fret. So that would be analogous to the nut position on a guitar that you're playing. Okay, everybody cool so far? Great. So, in around the mid-'80s, Emmett started to develop a tuning which he called the baritone tuning. In the baritone tuning, he dropped the melody side of the stick down a fourth. This is the tuning that Gene likes to use. And he dropped the melody side of the stick down a fourth, and he raised the bass side of the stick up a whole step. And in doing that, he retained the hand position relationships between the strings that he had. So he was able to retain some of those one-handed, double-sided chords that he was using. And he used that tuning for a while, and then I think he went back down a whole step with the left hand. Emmett's played just about every tuning you can imagine on the instrument. He's always coming up with something new. And his latest tuning is called the raised match reciprocal tuning, which has the bass strings are up a whole step from the classic tuning, and the melody strings are down, or no, they're actually in the same spot where they are. So it retains the high range but it brings the bass up a whole step. And I've got an instrument set up in that tuning that I'm going to play for you in a little bit. Yes, Gene?
On a 34-inch scale kind of legacy Chapman stick, I know that there are some restrictions with regards to the gauge of strings that you can use. You can only use light gauge for the 34-inch scale for the older Chapman sticks.
For the ones that don't have the adjustable truss rod, that's true. Okay. But there are lots of 34-inch scale instruments out here that have the rear adjustable truss rod, and on those you can put whatever gauge strings you want. So it only has to do with whether it has an adjustable truss rod or not. So up until about 1989, any instrument that was made before that point that hasn't been retrofitted with an adjustable truss rod, which you can see in the back here, those you can only use light gauge strings on, because otherwise it's too much tension for the truss rod.
So you can use, regardless of how old your instrument is, you can still use different tunings. You just have to be mindful of the gauge of the strings that you're using.
Also, if you don't have an intonatable bridge, in other words, if your bridge doesn't have this hardware on it where you can slide the intonation back and forth, then there's some limitations there as far as what you can use as well.
Very good.
Cool. So starting around 1989, Emmett introduced the rear adjustable truss rod, and then a couple of years after that, he introduced the fully intonatable bridge. Now he had an adjustable nut for many years. In fact, going back to the late 70s, I think he had an adjustable nut so he could get the action just right. But all these adjustable features are really important when you're trying to think about if you want to change your tuning to a different tuning. You need to be able to adjust the bridge height. You need to be able to adjust the intonation at the bridge, and you need to be able to adjust the height of the nut as well. Okay? Great. Now, fifths and fourths. Okay, so yeah, Emmett had this thing, but what's so great about having fifths and fourths? Well, the greatest thing about having fifths on the left-hand strings is that it allows you to cover a really wide range with one hand. So, you know, a pianist, I was a pianist, and so with a pianist, you basically have a reach of about a tenth, if you're lucky, you know, in one hand. With the stick, even just using 5 bass strings, I can play, for example, here's a D, right? And here is the D 2 octaves higher than that, and then here is the A above that. So I've got a 2.5 octave range in one hand that I can reach because I have fifths. And that's really nice because it makes it possible for you to have bass and chord accompaniment stuff going on in one hand. Let me show you an example like this. So this is a bass line and chords added in to the bass line. So what I'm doing is building a bass line I'm building an accompaniment part out of bass notes and chord tones. And because the chord tones are really far away from the bass note, that makes it possible for me to have almost sounding like 2 different instruments there with my left hand. So that's one of the things that fifths gives you, is the ability to spread the left hand's part out into multiple rolls. Another thing that it gives you is the ability to play all of the commonly used chord shapes over a 2-fret span, basically. So what I mean by that is, if I'm playing fourths on the melody strings, oftentimes I'll have to cover, so I've got 1, 2, 3, and 4 frets I'm covering here, okay? And in my left hand, to play that major chord, I only need 3 frets. So it's a 2-fret span from this fret to this fret. So when I say 2-fret span, that's what I'm talking about. Out of tune on that there, sorry. So that's a major chord, and so with this tuning of fifths, I get major, minor, augmented, diminished, major sixth, minor sixth, all of those just on these 3 strings. All right. Now, if I want to play 7th chords, I've got my major 7th, dominant 7th, minor 7th, diminished 7th, or that's also could be a minor 6th chord. You could look at it that way. And then down here, 13th, major 7th, dominant 7th, minor 7th. All of these shapes, very easy to cover with your hand on the extended scale, and that's the key, because, you know, guitar scale basically goes to about here, when you get down to these frets way down here, the frets are really far apart, and trying to cover them even with this kind of a shape, which is the shape that I was using on my right hand, that's really a stretch and not very comfortable to do. So fifths gives you expanded range, and it gives you the ability to play a whole family of really nicely compact chords without having to stretch your hand out. So, two things. Now, okay, that's nice to have, but isn't it kind of weird to be playing two different tunings? And what I would say to that is it's not really all that weird, because fifths going this way and fourths going that way, or ascending fourths and descending fifths, they have the same geometry. Hey, look, how's it going, man? They have the same geometry to them. So let me show you what I mean by that. If I play E, C, G like this in my right hand, can you guys see that okay? Sorry. And then I start over here and I go E, C, G like that. I'm playing the same pitches, but in this case I've got E on the bottom. In this case I've got E on the top. The geometry of the chord is exactly the same. Can you guys see that shape clearly in both hands? Okay, so the patterns of notes on the board are the same. They're just inverted from each other in terms of how they lay out. And that makes it easy to learn just a few shapes that you can then apply to the board consistently. All right, so fourths and fifths, not quite as weird as you might think. They have a lot of similarities to them, which makes the instrument not quite as strange as it would be if you had two completely different tunes. Okay?
Okay.
So ready so far?
Yeah. So I wanted to add something. So we've talked a little bit about two different tunings on a single instrument, which seems crazy, but it makes perfect sense. We've talked a little bit about the history, and we've talked about string gauges and variations. In terms of like what comes next, in terms of like what becomes available to us as consumers of Chapman Stick, variations and tunings. Like,
right.
So then.
Good question. So trying to figure out what tuning is going to suit your needs as a player. Okay. So before you even make that choice, though, I just want to again reiterate that if you choose a tuning that you're not really happy with, it's not a big deal to change the tuning. This instrument is designed to accommodate that change so easily. So go into it knowing that you're not really committing yourself to anything in particular, that it's easy to make that change if you decide that you want to. All right, now the classic tuning, one of the things about the classic tuning that I think is really useful to know, and again, we're just going to talk about 10-string tunings now. Even though I've got a 12-string instrument here, we're talking about 10-string tunings, okay? So I'm not going to be using all the strings. I'm not going to be using this high bass string, for example, right now. But I'll be showing you how different tunings fit on the board. It's much easier to do it with just this one instrument, basically, instead of having to switch things around. So the classic tuning, like I was saying earlier, you get a high D here. Sorry, let me pull this down just a little bit. You get a high D here as your highest note. Can you guys see that? Okay.
Greg, so you're aware the images might be getting in the way, so you might want to move to your perfect.
Like that? Okay, let me just swing the camera then instead of moving like that.
Perfect.
All right, so here I am. I've got my high D, okay, which is the highest fret position I can play on that string. And really that's kind of the limit on a long scale instrument as far as how high the notes can go. If you want to get higher than that, you're going to have to add extra frets, basically. And there are a couple of guys, Ewan Landreau and Andre Pellat over in France, who have extra frets on their sticks. But there's problems with that because you end up losing volume on your pickup and stuff because it has to be set up differently. So go with the regular 25 playable frets. And so here we have our D right there. And then kind of the limit on the low end, here I've got a low C, okay? I could tune this down just so you can hear. So that's got a low B flat right now, and my speaker can't even really produce that note very well anyway, and you're sure not going to hear it over the chat line anyway if the fundamental starts to disappear. So low B flat is about the lowest that you want to get into with these instruments also. When you get down to a low A, the string starts to get really too floppy, and it doesn't really do a good job. So the classic tuning gives you the greatest kind of overall range and still retains some of the inlay correspondences that help you find notes. So let me talk about that for just a second. All right, a lot of times people come to the stick from the guitar and they're used to seeing the guitar inlay pattern, and they don't really understand why these inlays are positioned the way they are. So you've got inlays at fret 2, fret 7, fret 12, and fret 17. Okay, and what's nice about that is that in the classic tuning, I've got a D here at fret 12 on the melody strings, and I've got a D here at fret 2 on the bass strings. And as I go across, D, A, E, B, sharp, those notes match up with each other. That's what Emmett calls a reciprocal arrangement, where we're moving across the tunings, and in one sense we're moving down, in one sense we're moving up, but we have the same lettered note names as we go. So in order to learn the classic tuning, you learn where the notes are in relation to the inlays, and it becomes very easy to find the notes. And then they look the same, because your right hand is typically playing in this region from here up to here, and your left hand is typically playing in this region from here to here. So they match up. I go up to fret 7 and fret 17. Same thing, right? Reciprocal relationship, I can see that. If I go off 2 frets from where I was before, same thing is going on. So that's a nice way to help you find your way around the notes in the classic tuning. And some of the other variations on the tunings don't have that inlay correspondence. They're not necessarily as easy to find the notes on. There are other ways to find the notes, but you lose that really nice correspondence there. Now, the other thing about the inlays that I want to show you is that the inlays tell you how to move your hand from one string to the next and still have the same pitches. So inlays are every 5 frets. If I'm on the melody strings here, and I play this note, which is an A, and I go down 1 string and up 5 frets, I've got an A. I go down 1 string and up 5 frets, I've got another A. So the relationship of the inlays to the pitches has some other consistencies that make it easy to find your way around on the board. So if you're playing a part down here, a chord, and you don't like how wiry that sounds, you can move it up here very easily, or move it up here, and find it very easily. Now on the bass strings, because the inlays are on fifths instead of on fourths, instead of going from D to D like that, where it's the same pitch, when I do it on the bass strings, D down to D, that direction, it goes down an octave, but it's still a D. So I have the same kind of thing where the notes are matching up as I go down the board. So I'm going to see patterns of notes that are repeating themselves in relation to the inlays. D, E, D, E, D, E. Again, it makes it easier to find your way around once you know how these notes are going to be relating to the inlays. It's easier to see. And Gene, I think, do you have those graphics that I sent you handy by any chance?
I will get them ready. Give me a few moments to get those to prep those, because I do believe I have those on my Google Drive.
Okay. The first one we're looking for is the one that has an F at the top, and then it's a column stuff.
Okay. I'll be ready. Give me a few moments on that.
Right. Excellent. So does anybody have any questions at this point about what we've talked about so far on the tunings? No? So far, so good?
I just got one question.
They're all experts.
Yeah.
You might get to this later, but I've read in comparisons of classic tuning to match reciprocal, there's a discussion of hand spacing.
Absolutely.
It's more comfortable to play in. Can you go into more detail about that?
Yeah, let me show you what that's about. So when I'm playing on the classic tuning, and I have to remember not to play my low melody string here for just a second, but if I'm playing here and I play a D, I'm playing on my melody strings. My lowest melody string is going to be 1 fret off. So both my hands are moving away from this kind of central point. My left hand is moving back towards the nut. My right hand is moving up towards the bridge. And it's very close together. There's not much room to breathe, okay, between the 2 hands. And I can't play any chords that go up this way without bumping into that spot. So what the match reciprocal tuning does, I've got an instrument here in match reciprocal, so I'm going to just put that on for a second, and I'll show you. I had a whole week to get ready for this, you guys. these are a little different in relation to the tuning because I'm using raised match reciprocal tuning on this instrument, but it's offset by a fret, so I can have my X fret. I'll explain that maybe another time. So on this instrument, when I play that D with my right hand, I'm 3 frets apart instead of 1 fret apart, okay, which means I can play my chords that go up past this finger here and not bump into my right hand. So Emmett did that so that he could have that ability to get his hands closer together down here and play. He basically gained himself a scale position for his right hand by dropping the melody strings down a whole step. Or in this case, of this instrument, raising the bass strings up a whole step. So this is raised matched reciprocal. The melody, the normal tuning of matched reciprocal is drops the melody strings down a whole step and keeps the bass strings where they are. So matched reciprocal gets its name because the pitches are matched with each other as you go across the board at the same fret. So here I've got, you hear how they line up like that? So they match. All right? So if you're working on the matched reciprocal tuning, what you want to do in order to learn where the notes are is to learn the notes up from the nut because they're going to be the same on both sides. And since you're not generally going to be playing both hands on the same fret at the same time, you're going to be learning more in relation to the nut where they are. Does that make sense? So you count up from the nut, you count up your octave. There's your octave from that position. You see I'm here, here, and then up here. I got my double octave there, which
that makes great sense. Coming from guitar, I'm used to counting from the nut anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And what I usually tell people is if you're coming from the guitar or the bass and you want to try a stick tuning that's going to make sense to you, the matched reciprocal tuning is actually a really nice tuning because it has a lot of similarities. The lowest note on the melody strings is an E, so that's the same as the guitar's low E, so that's another way to identify it. And I just think that it's a good choice for people who are coming from the guitar and the bass, especially if you're going to be playing the 12-string instrument. Now, let me talk just a second about, so we just talked about matched reciprocal, and the highest melody note on the regular matched reciprocal tuning is a C, so it's a whole step below the one that I was showing you before. Now I'm going to show you the baritone melody tuning, which well, I'll do it on this instrument. So this is the rail board, and I just got my new step about a few days ago, so I can use that to change my volumes nice and easy between these instruments. They all have different output levels. You guys hear that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so the baritone melody tuning. The baritone melody is a fourth lower, so my highest melody string is an A instead of a D. Okay, and that's going to cut into my high range at the top end, where I've got all the way up to here. But I don't know if you guys checked out the Amazing Grace video that I posted. That gets up pretty high. That's in baritone melody. So the tuning gets up higher than you think it does. And the bass strings are the same. So I've got my low D down here that I was playing before, and I've got my low C. Okay? Everybody clear on that?
Yeah, so I'd like to add something. So just for clarity, with the baritone melody tuning, basically the left hand, that is the bass side, stays the same, but in the right hand, you've got a string. You basically take a string off the top and you put it on the bottom. That is to say, if you were a guitarist or a bassist, it would be akin to having a low B string on your guitar, but
using the high E string kind of thing.
Right. So it's almost as if instead of tuning E to E on a guitar, you are tuning B to B.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So yeah.
Yeah,
That kind of helps with baritone melody. That kind of helps, and there's a lot of documentation on the baritone melody. Yeah. And Greg, I'll just add just really quickly, the 3 most documented in terms of what written materials are available. Greg has outlined those, and that is the classic tuning, the baritone melody, and more recently the matched reciprocal.
Yeah, and I've been playing baritone melody almost from the very beginning of my stick playing. I had a 10 string in the classic tuning, and I broke the highest pitch string. And I didn't really like the sound of that string as much as I really liked the lower strings anyway. So I said, well, why don't I try something? Why don't I just move the strings over and add a lower fourth? Which sounded like a great idea because I wanted the strings to overlap more. So with the baritone melody tuning, instead of my lowest string being this string, my lowest string is down here. Goes way down into the range of the bass string. So it's more like a rhythm guitar kind of a sound, right? It's getting way down into that low end of the guitar. So it's a trade-off. You know, you lose some of the higher notes, but you gain this really nice meaty rhythm section. Just to give you some examples, Emmett, the recording of Parallel Galaxy, all of Guillermo Cides' stuff, that's all done with classic 10-string. So when you hear that music, you hear those really high strings going on. All my stuff in 10-string recording was done with baritone melody tuning. So Stick Figures, Soul, Water on the Moon, all of those are being done with baritone melody. So you can get a sense of what the range is with that as well. Okay? Everybody cool on that? All right. So moving on, let me talk a little bit about...
And Greg, I'm ready with the graphics if you need those.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So go ahead and put up that one that says F. It starts with an F at the top. So this is something I want everybody to think about a little bit. It has to do with finding your way around on the tunings. Okay. So this is the circle of fourths in a linear fashion. It's the line of fourths, if you will.
Okay, just a moment here. Here we go.
There we go. Great. Okay, so when you're looking at the board, right, and you find, for example, here is an F. All right, actually, let me tune this up to a fifth here first. So you find an F, and you see that it goes, if you go F, C, G, D, A, E, you can go across the board like that and identify all those notes. If I go down here to this note, which is an E, then I've only got E, B, and then I run out of notes above that. So these are, I know that these are all going to be accidentals after that point. Right? So it's going to go E, B, F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp. Okay? Does everybody understand what's happening there?
Yep.
So if I'm starting at D, then I know I've got D, A, E, B, and then I'm into my accidentals again. So this is a way to identify the notes across the fret. And if you've got an instrument like a match reciprocal instrument, where in that case this top note is going to be a C, then I know I'm going to be going. I'm playing a D now, but just for the sake of demonstration, then I would be going C, G, D, A, E, B. Right? Everybody understand that? So this is one way that you can see the pattern of the notes on the board. And again, what's nice about this is that it's the same on both sides of the instrument. You only have to remember this sequence going from top to bottom like that. Think about that as your highest melody string or lowest bass string going all the way down across the other direction. So if we're starting on F and I'm going to go up to F up here, okay, can you guys see me? And I'm going to go F over here, then I go, yeah, I'm going to go. All right? Everybody got it? So that's one nice way of identifying the notes. Now, another way that I like to identify the notes is to use pentatonic patterns. Hey, Kevin, how are you doing?
Hi, guys.
Welcome.
I've always been here. I just had my video off.
Okay. You have to imagine what you were doing.
Put some clothes on, man.
All right. So we have one that's pentatonic pattern called. It's
I got it.
You got it?
Yeah.
All right. So trying to learn the names of or the position of all the lettered note names on the board can be kind of daunting. It's a lot of territory to cover. And so what I like to do instead is to look at the pattern of notes in a minor pentatonic pattern. So I'm just waiting for Gene to get that one up there. And let's see. Because you've only got 5 notes that you need to learn. And then when you learn what where those 5 notes are, then it's very easy to find the notes that are around those notes. So, all right, looks like something's happening. Okay, there we go, great. So in this case, I'm looking at, you see there's 7 strings there again. And I really like the way that the strings lay out. So at the top, you've got A, C, and D. So remember on the classic tuning we had a D here. So I go down here and I've got A, C, D. Well, now I know that I've got a B there, right? Because I know that B is in between that A and C. If I go down to the next string, I've got F, G, A, right? Then I've got C, D, F, C, D, F. So then I know that's going to be an E, right? So I'm trying to learn the pattern of notes in the pentatonic pattern as it lays out there. And as luck would have it on the bass strings, the same thing is going on. Here's an A, right? So I've got A, C, D, F, G. Sorry, I missed it. Then I keep going. That's not a part of the chart there, but you see it in the second line at the bottom. D, F, G. So learning that pentatonic pattern is a nice way to learn where the notes are. Can you put up the diatonic pattern now, Gene? So you can go from this, which is a very simple thing to see, right? And so for me, my inlay marker would be right underneath that D and A on the right-hand side there. I would say, okay, that's my inlay marker. And then my other inlay marker would be right underneath that A on the left-hand side. So that shows me where that pattern is right there. So when Gene gets the diatonic pattern up there, then we'll be able to talk about, you can see the difference between the diatonic and pentatonic pattern and how much busier the diatonic pattern is. Righty, Gene? And so there's our pentatonic pattern. And there were only 3 notes per string on that, and some of them actually were overlapping from string to string. And with the diatonic pattern, what you can see is that there's a lot more information that you have to keep track of, right? So, okay, and it goes on forever. That's the thing about the diatonic pattern that drives me crazy. Okay, so in this case, what I'm looking at is a pattern of notes across 6 frets where there's just a lot of information in there. So it's harder to see the pattern itself because you've got 4 notes per string. The middle one actually has 5 notes on it. And it's just too hard, in my view, to remember all of those things when you're looking at the board. So, you know, when a keyboard player is looking at the keyboard, he's got white keys and black keys. That really makes it easy to figure out where the notes are. So on the stick, we need to try to find ways to simplify the visual presentation of the notes. And I think diatonic is too busy. It's just too much information to look at. So thanks, Chief. That's really all I wanted to show with that one. So back to the view here. A couple of other things I like to use. For example, on the baritone melody tuning or the classic grand tuning, I like to find reference point pitches. So in this case, I've used the inlay marker at the 12th fret is a great place for me to find my C notes. So that's a C and that's a C, and they both straddle that inlay marker there. I think that's a really handy reference point for me, and I'm always using that reference point to find out where I am. With match reciprocal tuning, you're going to have different kinds of reference points because you're going to have a C up here at the top, so then you can look at it that way. That's C, and then you go down the scale from there, or up the scale from there. In the left hand, I think the most important note to know by far is this C, because this note, everything else kind of radiates around that. If you look at that, it's on fret 5. It's like right smack in the center of this bass tuning group. And so learning that note, C, this G, this F, D down here, D up here, E, these are all very important notes to learn. And because you build the chords out of bass notes, you want to try to learn the bottom string of the stick, bottom 2 strings of the bass strings diatonically. That's really important. So I know I said that seeing the diatonic pattern is too much information. On the melody strings, I think that's generally 2. But looking at it on the bass side, you really want to know that this is D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, right? Those are super important notes to know because all your chords are going to be building off of those bass notes for the most part. So you really need to know those cold. All right? Anybody have any questions about the tunings we've talked about so far?
You know what I'd like to do, if I could? Take this moment right now. We've talked about a bunch of different tunings, diatonic, pentatonic scales. Greg, if it's okay, could we do a quick survey and talk about what tunings we're using here on this call? Just out of curiosity.
Everybody's mics are muted, so I don't know.
Okay, I'll start. I started with what was a standard tuning, which then became a classical tuning. And then I moved over to this kind of hybrid baritone tuning. So that's the tuning that I currently use, which is...
So you're tuning it baritone melody in the right hand and then up a whole step in the left.
Right. So Luke, what kind of tuning do you use?
I am still using classic tuning at this point. Last year I did do an experiment with baritone melody, and it wasn't really that hard to get used to. The only reason I went back to classic is because, just from my own taste and my own ear, I wasn't digging the timbre that I was getting out of the lower string. I don't know, it was a little too fuzzy, maybe a little too chunky for me. So I ended up going back to classic, and it just felt a lot more comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you just get a feeling about a tuning. Because I tried baritone melody and I tried matched reciprocal. Hey, Randy's here. So I tried a bunch of different tunings, and like you said, Luke, that one just felt right. And there's a lot of questions that kind of come and go, where it's like, which is the best one, or I don't feel good about it, or I've been playing this for a year. And a lot of times, a change in your tuning can totally and completely change the way you approach the instrument. You know, whether or not to what extent is that just a mental thing? You know, is that perceived change? You don't know, but if it feels right, like you're saying, Luke, it just feels right. What about you, Kevin? What kind of tuning are you using?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
You can, eh? I started with classic tuning, the standard tuning, and after about 8 months, somebody said, why don't you try match reciprocal, just because of the relationship between the strings and the way they're tuned. And I tried that, and I haven't moved back from that. I don't think it's too important. People get really hung up about it when you're first starting out. I think any tuning would work for anybody. And people get too hung up about it. So, but yeah, match recip for me. I do have my graphite down the basement that's been tuned by Emmett to dual bass recip. But since I've got from him, I haven't really messed with it too much.
I see. So you've got two instruments,
really messed with it too
tunings. You've got two different instruments and two different tunings, which is pretty cool thing to do when you have a stick, when you have that kind of option. Okay, so we've got. Damon, can you hear us? Are you there?
He posted that he's using the DBR down a half step.
Okay, doesn't have a mic. Okay, cool.
So he can't talk to us. So,
okay. So we've got another DVR. I'm just doing a little poll right now. And then, Steve, what kind of tuning are you using there?
I had started. Everyone can hear me, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Had started in classic. Like Greg said, I didn't like the thinness of the top, and of course, listening to the Stick Figures album about 10 gazillion times, loved the low range punch that Greg was getting on the album. I couldn't figure out how he was doing it. Threw up on Stick as, hey, could it go lower? Always loved the mid-range and upper mid-range of a bass because I came from it as a bass player. So always loved that sound. Then tried the tuning out. I was like, oh, this is perfect. And then when I did my prog rock album, Steel and Glass, playing with a guitar player, it just became essential because we could split the duties up, and I was never really running over the guitar player. We always knew when to switch because I had that nice low range. There was always plenty of room. So I love it. That's the way to go for me.
Cool. And that just felt right. So you tried classic, tried baritone melody. How about you?
I just never liked those. I never liked that thin high sound, and of course I broke that top string as well.
What kind of pickup are you using out of curiosity?
Just a regular old stick up.
Okay, good. Okay. Randy, can you hear us okay? You're muted right now.
You just typed it. You can hear us.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I'm currently using 12-string match reciprocal. So you've got 2 sticks. So we've got another 12-string matched reciprocal. Okay. And then we've got baritone melody on a second stick. Okay. And then, okay, cool.
All right. And so what I'm using these days, I've got 4 different.
Great. Hold on, because we're going to do you last. We're saving best for last, all right? But I want to, before we go on to the guy that has like 7 sticks, I want to ask Rob what kind of tuning he went with his rail board.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I have to focus on myself now. I see how it is. My stick could come pretty much any day now. I actually haven't paid my deposit, but I figure railboards can come pretty quickly after the deposit, so I might get it this month. I've ordered raised match reciprocal, and because the highest note is the same as a 22 fret guitar, so the high range should be familiar to my ears. And I may go significantly lower just because I found I really love fatness and lowness. I used on guitar, I used really chunky strings like 54 to 60 on the 6th string, tuned to C in the 2nd octave in open C minor, and I love that fat string low note sound. So we'll see what happens, but I'm gonna commit to at least 6 months of race at match reciprocal.
Okay. So let me show you the results of the poll here. Because Greg, we're going to do you last, because I know you've got one of each at least, right? Is that fair to say? Okay, so we've got 2 players with 2 sticks. So we're just going to count it as, let's see here, 6. There's a total of 9 sticks, not including grit. Of the 9 sticks that we have, we've got 2 baritone melody. We've got 1 classic, 2 matched reciprocal, 2 dual bass reciprocal, 1 raised matched reciprocal, and then 1 full baritone tuning, which is almost like a custom tune. So you can see 7 stickists actually have 7 different tunings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different tunings. So, and also what we learned from this as well is that people switch tunings, and then people switch tunings and then switch back. So, it's like, what's the best tuning for you? What feels good? Whatever feels good. And that first step is a big step. And you get nervous when you buy like a new instrument, you drop 2 or 3 or even 4 grand in one sitting. It's like you want it to be just perfect. But with the tuning, just be patient. Give yourself an out. Maybe after a year you want to change the tuning. So Greg, I'm going to turn it back over to you because I know you're going to tell us about all the different tunings that you have, and possibly some alternate tunings that are more popular.
Absolutely. So Damon and Kevin both mentioned the dual bass reciprocal tuning, and I have an instrument here that is set up in the dual bass reciprocal tuning. This is my tuning experimentation stick, and it doesn't have any permanent inlay markers on it. I use this little violin fingerboard tape to put inlays on it, so I can try out different tunings, and I can always go back to having my inlays correspond to the pitches that I'm really familiar with from the classic and the baritone melody tuning instruments. So dual bass reciprocal is it's a really fun tuning, especially if you're a bass player, but it's also a really nice tuning to have as an alternate for a regular stick tuning. The bass strings are tuned in fifths, going out from the middle like they are on the bass side of the regular classic tuning. And the melody strings are tuned in fourths, going out from the middle, but they're much, much lower. The two tuning groups share a common string, and in this case, it's a low B. Okay, so first time I used this tuning, I did it based on a low C, but in this case, it's based on a low B. So you can see I go up from here to here, and there D is where I put my inlay markers. So that's giving me the same inlays that I would have if I had a classic bass side on the stick. But that low B string is shared by both sides of the tuning. So it's going up in fifths from here, but it's also going up in fourths, starting with that string. So this turns this into a 7-string bass, basically, on these strings here. It just has a really amazing sound, I think. I love the sound of this tuning. It's so fun to play with. So just a really fun instrument to mess around with as a bass player. Yes, Gene.
Yeah, so I want to talk about this tuning for a while because you put up a video a little while ago and people freaked out and Claire's like, I'm going to change my tuning now. And talk again about how using this tuning kind of is similar to a bass with the way that you've got it set up and its current and it's the way it's kind of constructed.
Yeah, so if I was playing a bass, right? If I had a 6-string bass, for example, and I had my low B here, I'm just plucking this low string here, okay? Then as I go in this direction, what would be my my normal positions on my neck? I would go B, B, A, like that, okay? Everybody understand how that's working? Okay, but at the same time, that low B is also part of this tuning group going this way. Okay, so it goes B, F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp. Everybody understand? So it's really an amazing tuning in that regard because you can play like accompaniment stuff. I can sit here and play.
There's a lot of overlay. There's a lot of overlap there.
Exactly. So I can play like chords in my left hand. Or I can play my regular two-hand stuff that I would do on the stick. So if I'm a bass player and I want to have access to that two-handed bass stuff, cheers, Kevin. I wish I could. Man, I gotta go get a glass of wine, man. I got my cup. Right, so, and then I've got the ability to be lyrical in my soloing, like I do with the right hand on the stick in the fourths. When you've got fourths. So the fourths have a wonderful relationship to the shape of the hand going in this direction. I mean, I understand why the bass is set up this way, so that the left hand is moving in this direction. It's basically coming from the guitar. But I swear, if you were to start over again and find the way to switch the hand around so that the fourths were going this way, I think bass playing would be a totally different experience for people. It would be amazing. Yeah. So I really believe that the stick leads to some interesting things. Like I really considered getting a cello and switching the strings around it and learning how to play the cello with a backwards tuning based on all the things that you can do with the left hand of the stick. there's your Bach cello suite thing right there. So the fifth's there and the hand moving that way. It's such a nice feeling the way that it fits the shape of the hand. So it's in one sense the tuning is kind of a novelty tuning. Like if I was wanting to be a stick player, I wouldn't want this to be my only instrument as a soloist because to me it just doesn't go up high enough.
Right. And so let me add to that in our survey that we conducted right now with 6 stick players, the only 2 that had the dual match bass. What's the
bass reciprocal?
Sorry?
Dual bass reciprocal.
The dual bass reciprocal. In each case, they were both a second instrument, or they had 2 instruments. Relative.
See, that Damon said that he had 2 sticks. I thought he only had 1. So.
Oh, okay.
See that.
I could be wrong. He might text us and say otherwise. Yeah, actually, he only has 1. Okay, so I stand corrected.
There you go. So if you're a bassist and you're looking to get
even a bassist,
and you don't care about playing high notes, you don't care about playing guitar parts and stuff, this tuning is a really fun tuning. So check it out.
Okay.
I showed you earlier that I have the rail board in the baritone melody tuning. Okay, so that's another one that I've got here. And I will always have a 10-string stick in the baritone melody tuning somewhere in my arsenal because to me that's just like coming home. That's the instrument and the tuning that I started out with and that I played for years and years and years. So I also have a grand stick in the high bass classic with a high bass 4th tuning. Okay, and that's basically the same as the baritone melody tuning, but I'm adding a 4th onto each set of strings at the high end. Okay, so gotta tune this down. Now, what I really like about this particular tuning is that it gives me some chords that I don't normally get if I only have 5ths in the left hand. So if you're thinking about getting a grand stick and you want to have some extra capabilities, this is a really, really interesting tuning to have. And I'd just like to show you a little bit about what those chordal possibilities are right now, if that's okay with you guys. So when I take the regular 10-string tuning, I have, for example, my dominant 7th chord like this. And if my top string is tuned up to that normal tuning, a 5th higher, I can't really add anything interesting harmonically to this chord based on the way that the strings lay out. Because of the way that the hand position is fitting that shape. I do get consistency. Here's my major chord. I'm moving it around. It's the same shape everywhere. Major chord, major chord, major chord, major chord. So that consistency is nice. But what I want to get is this alternate chord tone capability in just one hand. So instead of having to use my right hand to find these chord tones and fill them into the left-hand chords, by having this particular tuning, I can take that dominant 7th chord, for example, and by simply double stopping with my 2nd finger, I get a sharp 9 chord, which is an awesome thing to be able to hear. 3 fingers, 4 notes, a really beautiful chord, So blues, wonderful. And then if I go down to my 4 chord here, this would be the dominant 7th there, and I add that same double stop technique over here, I get a 13th, just by virtue of being able to double stop that chord. So I get a really nice fat harmony. It's fabulous kind of a sound. Really extends the capability of the left hand in terms of playing chords. It's one of the things about having a grand stick that is totally worth it. If you're thinking about, should I get a 10-string stick? Should I get a 12-string stick? The grand stick really, with this high bass 4th, gives you a huge opportunity for accompaniment variation in the left hand. Okay? And it goes further. For example, Steve posted a question on Stickist yesterday about major and minor ninth chords. Okay, with this particular tuning, I can play, for example, here's my major chord like this. Can you guys see my hand okay, or is it blocked out? Okay, so I play this major chord like this. Then, by adding this note here, I get my major ninth right there. And here's my minor ninth right there. Okay? Really nice sound. Okay? You hear that, Steve? So that's another thing that gives you. Tremendous capability there. Okay?
So, I'd like to add something to that really quickly. So, the stick in the left hand, I think part of what makes the stick so unique is the left hand tuning and the way you can use your left hand and the way you can color bass lines, or you can use redundancy in both hands to have it sound like two guitars. And having a 12-string stick and having that option of the fourth on top, like you said, it gives it another dimension. And as a 10-string player, I've always kind of admired that. I had a 12-string for a while, but having that option at that high register really does, because you get used to playing certain chords on the stick. You've got that kind of minor position, minor third, minor 7 that's so comfortable. You can move your finger up and have a major chord in the first inversion that's also very comfortable. But when you add that fourth, when you're using the 12-string, it really it adds, not that it doesn't make it sound like a stick, but it gives it a lot of character. And I think some of the more, does Rob Martino use that tuning?
No, Rob uses a mirrored fourths tuning, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay. So just to flesh this out just a little bit, another nice thing that it does for you is that because these two strings are the same pitch, they're just an octave apart, you can substitute this string with this string when you play any of the chords you want to play. So for example, if I play this major chord here, I'm going to play a G major, like that. Well, we've all heard that chord a million times, right? So the root 5, and then your major 10th, your major 3rd up there on top. So instead of using this note here, I can take my second finger and I can move it out to the 12th string, and now I've got that voicing, where my 5th is up on top. And it's so easy to do because it's all just happening at the same fret. So any chord I'm playing, I can substitute out this finger on this string for this string. So if I play, for example, my major 7th shape here, like that, well, I just move these two fingers over one string. I've got a way different sounding chord, all right, and much higher up into the melody range. Really very lyrical, beautiful kind of separation. So I can't say enough about this particular variation on the tunings. Yeah, you have to think about it sometimes, but most of the time it's just gold to have those extra chord capabilities there. And the last thing about it that I really dig, well, there's two more things really quick. One of them is you've got a 3-string power chord, root 5 octave at 1 fret. So I'm sitting here playing my two-handed bass. Instead of having 2 notes like that, I've got root 5 octave. Huge, massive sound. Wonderful thing to be able to have there, just by triple stopping over there. So take note, anytime I'm playing this chord, I can triple stop. Now I've got a 4-note chord just by adding that extra string up on top. All right? Again, really rich, nice sound. If I had a 5th there, I wouldn't be able to do that because this note would be down here. So I'd have to change my shape of the chord completely. All right? And for the big finale finish here, we've got root 5 octave 5 octave. 5-note power chord right there with 3 strings and 3 fingers. Okay? Really nice, big, fat sound. Okay, so the high bass 4th, very cool. Last cool point about the high bass 4th is that since it's mimicking what's going on in the right hand, if I'm going to sit here and I'm going to play my an A right here, and I'm going to play this A right here, on the top 2 strings, I'm I've got an exact mirror, so I can play unison. And because they're both up in kind of that high range, it has almost that kind of bouzouki sound to it, or an oud almost. Really nice kind of a sound, doubling up those strings. So high bass fourth gives you some really interesting capabilities and possibilities. I strongly suggest to anyone who is considering the Grand Stick that they check this out, because it really does open up what the left hand can do.
Okay. So, we've talked a lot about the Grand. Something we haven't talked too much about, and we haven't covered the NS. We won't cover the NS too much, at least in this, but we'll be featuring some NS players later this month, in the month of February 2015. But what about altos and SG12s? Can we talk for just a few moments about that?
Yeah, let's talk about that. And in order to talk about those, what I want to do is I want to put on my other 10-string stick, which has the the raised match reciprocal tuning on it, which is higher. Because I want to show you that sound, and that's really what people are looking for when they're getting into the shorter scale sticks, is they're trying to get into this very high sound, which the longer scale sticks tend not to give you. Now, on this tuning, the raised match reciprocal tuning, you actually do get some of that. So what the alto stick and the SG12 do is they basically start the instrument here. So you basically lose this much of the stick. So it's a shorter scale, which means you can get better, higher tension up on the strings. And they can be like a fifth higher almost compared to what the regular stick tuning is. And you can hear that. Sorry, I'm out of the frame here, but when I get up to the highest point. So that's a high D right there. And the alto and the SG12 are capable of playing up a major third higher than that. They can go all the way up to a high F sharp.
That's
and their lowest note that they can play that really is going to sound good at all is going to be this G right down here. Okay, so that's a G below the guitar's low E, but a little bit higher than the bass guitar's low E. So those are the range. That's the overall range that you can get to on the alto and on the SG12. And otherwise, you can tune them with the same kind of configurations that you would tune the regular 10 and 12 string sticks, fifths, fourths. I want to talk a little bit, if we can, about the mirrored fourths, because I don't want that to get away from me entirely before we're done. So Eric Knapp had asked about that, and I wanted to make sure to give a nod to it. So everybody knows Rob Martino's music, amazing music, and a big part of his sound is that he's using mirrored fourths tuning, which means he's got fourths on his bass strings instead of fifths going out in the middle. And I'm going to do kind of a mock-up of part of that on my Grand Stick so you can hear a little bit about what that gives you. But I certainly can't do it justice anywhere near like what Rob does. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tune tuning that one down another step, and I'm going to tune this one down a whole step.
Maybe while you're doing that, what I can do is I think we'll cover this tuning, and then maybe we'll make sure that if people have any questions, that they've had an opportunity to ask them.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Probably what I'll do is I'd like to talk about what Rob and I have coming up for the month of February. Next month's going to be, or next week rather, is going to be a really good one. But so, anyways, after we're done with this tuning here, poll everyone, make sure there's any questions answered. I'll just kind of do a wrap up and tell you what's coming up.
Great. So with mirrored fourths tuning, what you get is the same patterns that you're using on the right hand in the left hand. So they're both working out from the middle, and they mirror each other. So instead of moving the same direction to play that pattern, if you had a parallel tuning where you had fourths going this way and fourths going this way, you have fourths going this way on both hands. So try to get it so where you can see my hands. So here I would play. You see how that's working? I'm moving it out from the middle towards the outside. And it's very instinctive. I mean, if you're used to playing the right hand in fourths, it's very easy to all of a sudden play your left hand in fourths. The problem is switching back and forth between the two is very confusing. I tried it for a while to have one instrument in mirrored fourths and the other one in fifths. And every time I picked up one, I totally screwed me up based on what I was doing on the other one. So it's a very difficult thing to get used to doing both of them at the same time. I mean, try it if you want to. But so in Rob's tuning, he's got his lowest note is an E. So it's basically the bass guitar low E. And his rationale is that he told me once, he said, if that low E is good enough for Geddy Lee, it's good enough for him. And so that's where he's starting from. And he's going up in fourths from that. So the melody range is slightly less than you get out of the fifths. I think it's about maybe a sixth less than you get out of fifths overall. And then the chord shapes, for example, I can play the same shape that I would play on my right hand. Well, there we are, matched up, the same exact shape in each hand. So that's really the benefit of it, is that each hand uses the exact same language on the board. Now, the caveat that I would make for that is, and this is really good if you're trying to play piano music, for example. It's much easier to play piano-style chords in fourths than it is to play them in fifths. But what I would say is that that similarity is not necessarily 100% true, because if you look at what's happening here, my left hand has to cover the scale where the frets are this far apart. That same chord, the frets are about an inch closer to each other from the outside of the chord as far as the hand goes. You see how spread out my left hand is and how compacted my right hand is to play the same chord. The physical feeling of playing in fourths down here, where the frets are that far apart, is not the same as the physical feeling of playing in fourths way up here. So it's a great tuning for the SG-12, for example, if you want to play classical music. It's fabulous tuning for that because it really makes it a lot easier to play piano chords and lines compared to the fifths. And, you know, the stick is perfectly well set up to accommodate that. It's just some minor adjustments at the nut and the bridge, and you can try that tuning if you want. So
I just had a quick question. On the fourths tuning, it looks like all of the lowest notes that you're playing on your left hand are starting on the pinky, and you're having to go up towards the headstock.
It depends. I mean, I don't know the chord voicings all that well, so I'm sure if you watch Rob's tuning, he uses a lot of chord where he plays with the second finger playing the bottom note of the chord. So watch his videos. You know, hopefully someday he'll post some kind of instructional materials about how to play chords in that tuning. But yeah, it's definitely more. It's definitely a different feeling to me. I like the way that with the fifths, you're either starting with your first finger or you're starting with your third finger. Your first finger going up this way, your third finger going back this way. There's not very many chords except for maybe like the diminished chord where you have to play with your second finger on the root and build the chord out in both directions from there.
You know, I'd like to add something about the diminished chord on the Chapman stick, because oftentimes it kind of presents a conundrum on how to voice that and not have a diminished or even an augmented chord sound awkward because you're lower in the register. And that is more often than not, when you're playing a diminished chord, you'll be hearing at least one of those qualities in the melody. So even if you get two of the necessary three chords to make a diminished chord, be it major or minor, you know, if you look at the real book, right, just for reference, more often than not, you're hitting that diminished chord in the melody.
Yeah.
Not an exaggeration. Like, don't take my word for it. Check it out. I want to wrap up. We've got a good hour and maybe 10 minutes. And so I suppose I want to make sure if anyone has any questions, specifically about tunings, the choice of tunings, changing tunings, that we've covered them all. Well,
just a couple of brief observations real quick before we get into that. Classic tuning, highest melody possibility. Okay, biggest range, lowest bass, highest melody. That's the whole point of the classic. Not as much overlap between the two. Baritone melody, more overlap. Deep baritone melody, even more overlap between the two sides. Matched reciprocal, increased hand spacing positions for the instrument. Okay, still a nice high tuning, not quite as much meat in terms of the rhythm stuff on the right hand. So those are like the main differences in the most common tunings.
That's good. That is good to know.
And then the raised matched reciprocal basically gives you the retains the high range of the classic tuning, but gives you the additional hand spreading aspect of the matched reciprocal tuning by raising the bass up a whole step. So your left hand plays closer to the nut, and that's the difference there. Okay. So I really like the raised matched reciprocal tuning, and if I was going to try to play, for example, Bach on the stick, that's the tuning I would use, because it's up high enough that it gives you the ability to play everything in the original octave pitch that it was written for. So a really cool thing about the raised matched reciprocal tuning vis-a-vis Bach.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, wow. Greg, thank you so much for spelling us out and spelling us all out. In that last 2 minutes there, where you kind of went through all the tunings very quickly, that was some real bread and butter right there. So I'll probably be pointing people to that last bit. It's like if you listen to anything, listen to the quick analysis of the different tunings and the way that they relate to the other hand, to both of the hands. I enjoyed that.
Absolutely. And one last really quick point is that everybody who sees the stick baits, the SB8, and they think, well, I want to play like Tony Levin, should I get an SB8? And I tell them, Tony is just playing the regular stick tuning, So what he does with that two-handed bass stuff, that's all just the classic inverted fifths, two-handed bass stuff. So don't feel like you have to get a bass stick to play two-handed bass. It's not true.
That's right. Okay, cool. Well, Steve, Luke, Kevin, Damon, Rob, questions, comments?
Just a real quick one. In terms of somebody who's wanting to switch back and forth between different tunings, as long as you're not swapping out any of the strings and not going to different gauges or anything like that, you don't necessarily have to mess with any intonation adjustments if you're trying a different tuning, right? As long as you're using the same strings in the same place, and as long as your instrument is in tone,
you wouldn't want to do that. And the reason why you don't want to use the same strings is because the tension is going to be so different on the strings that you're not going to get a good sense of what the tuning actually really feels like. Do you know what I mean? Right. So if you want to try a different tuning and you really want to get a sense of what it can do for you, you really should get the appropriate strings and use them, because they're not going to feel right otherwise, and you're going to think, well, this sounds terrible. It's all floppy. I don't like it. Emmett is so good at picking out the strings for his tunings that you really want to go with what he recommends in order to do a proper experiment.
Right. I was thinking more in terms of a tuning where you're maybe only adjusting by a whole step or something like that. But I mean, it's
a lot of tension difference. The stick's tension is a lot lower, relatively speaking. So when you drop the tuning, you make it super floppy, and when you raise it up, you add a lot of resistance, and a lot of the string behavior changes dramatically. I only do that on the top bass side string. That's the only one I ever change like that.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
I had a question. Which gauges of strings are preferable for each tuning that we've gone over, and how do each gauge affect each tuning?
There's no real rule about that, because the way Emmett designs the tunings and the gauges is he matches up the feel and tone for each set. So if you get a light gauge baritone melody set, that's going to sound and feel very different from a heavy gauge classic tuning set. Okay, but in each case, they're going to be appropriate. They're going to work. They're going to be balanced across the tuning set. It's just a question of what your personal preferences are. I don't think one is any better than any other, as far as that goes.
But is there still a trade-off with the heavier gauge, with tone and intonation and everything else? I mean, what would the advantage of something going to something lighter as opposed to a medium or heavy for any of these tunings be other than just preference?
Just a little bit more suppleness to the strings, a little bit more subtlety in terms of how you can interact with it. You know, heavy gauge strings, it's much harder to get vibrato and string bending on heavy gauge strings. Much easier on light gauge strings. I used to play light gauge strings. I really like the mediums. I think they're a really nice compromise.
Okay. So, a good question, Steve. Did anyone else have any questions?
Damon had one. Would you read it out for him?
Damon, on your DVR, I thought I remember you mentioning you use light gauge strings. How is the playability on the higher frets? I'm using higher gauge right now, which is great on the low end, but can be difficult to get a good sound on the upper end.
Yeah, I would say that I use what Emmett would probably call a medium light set on there, and the reason why you want to get a lighter gauge string on the higher notes on the dual bass reciprocal is because they're getting so thick when you get up really on the higher frets. They don't really ring out as true as they would otherwise. So you want to get a little bit more meat maybe on the highest strings than you would normally have, and a little less meat on the lowest bass strings than you would normally have, so that when you get up to those higher strings, they still sound like bass strings. So I love the way Emmett has set up the dual bass reciprocal tuning. I think it's so musical the way he's put it together. It's really fabulous. I hope that answers your question, Damon. I would say try going for a lighter set overall and see how that feels to you.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, listen, I think we're at about time. I'd like to thank you, Steve, Luke, Kevin, Damon. Randy joined us for a little while here. Rob, obviously, thank you for putting together the session and taking charge of everything. And, of course, Greg, thank you for your expertise. Thank you for guiding us down this path and answering these questions and making sure that we've got everything to make a good decision about tuning for the Chapman Stick.
My pleasure. I really had a great time, and anytime you guys want me to come back on Freelance Friday, I'm always up for it. So thanks again, and I just wanted to have a big shout out to Emmett and the folks at Stick Enterprises. I think the instruments they build are amazing, and the fact that I can just experiment with tunings and get killer results all the time blows me away. I just love it.
Good. Yeah, I think the feeling is mutual. At some point, maybe what we'll do is we'll have something coming up with pickups. I think that'd be fun, too. I know Greg has excellent resources out there on stick.com on Stick Tech that Meet the Pickups video, which I highly recommend if you haven't seen it. Maybe we'll do a little something on that. We can talk about the R block and the passive 4 and the various different settings, and maybe something on MIDI at some point.
And preamp.
Yes, and the step about. So that's coming up too. So a little shout out. Watch for some press out there in the Stickosphere about the new step about. Lots of improvements. Greg, we're going to have maybe a whole session devoted to that, time willing.
Or just to preamping in general and EQing and the beginning of your signal chain. I'd really like to talk about that.
You got it. So let me tell you really quickly what we have coming up for this month. We're going to be recording, I think, some of the guys from the Rocket Scientists, including Don Schiff. We're going to talk about recording with the NS, playing in a band with the NS. What do we do with the NS? Don Schiff uses a half fretless. We've had Don on the show before, so we'll bring him back, kind of let him and the band kind of talk about their processes and how they revolve around what Don does, who's also a bassist and a cellist. I think next Friday we were going to have Michael Millsap, but what we're going to do is Rob's going to do a bit on basically finding an amp for the left hand, right? Getting a good bass hand side, getting a good left hand bass sound, finding the right speaker, specs, deep dive, Geek Town. You're going to love it. You're going to have a great time. You'll laugh. You'll cry. You'll wish you had been there when we recorded it. And then on February 20th, we have Dean Kobayashi, who is one of another NS player and just a fantastic guy. He was out at the Anaheim NAMM Stick Night. And anyways, we're out of time. I'm out of time. So again, I just want to thank everyone. If there's anything that we missed, just let us know. Oh, and then last thing, Michael Millsap. We're going to reschedule Michael Millsap. And he's a great NS player, and he's known as Dr. Froth on the Stickist. So,
Great
anyways,
show.
gotta bounce, so I gotta jump out. So Rob, I'm gonna hand it off to you. Okay.
I guess I'll pick it up then.
Okay. I'm out. I'm
All
hoping the broadcast doesn't stop when I leave. So if it does, I apologize, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is pure experiment right now.
So if it does, happy Free Hands Friday, you guys. Thanks so much. Bye.
All right. So, thank you guys very much. Are we out then? Gene, I still see you, man. You're still here.
Yeah, he's still here. I don't know what's up. I think he's trolling us right now.
No, it's gonna make me end the broadcast. So I gotta check out. I gotta bounce. I'm sorry. So this is farewell.
Bye, guys. It was nice to see you all.
You, Kevin.
You too, Kevin. Greg, everybody else, good to see you. Got us blessed.